Okay, welcome back. We're still on page 47 talking about the four frames. And we've just finished talking about the structural frame, and it has an awful lot to do with the culture of the organization. The human resources part, this talks about, do you have flexible work schedules? Do you have the ability to hire somebody? Is there like a hiring freeze going on, or this gargantuan process you have to go through to hire additional people? Or is it one of those things where, sure, you can go hire some temporary people, don't worry about it, just do your own thing. That philosophy of how the HR system works. You could even include things like, are there any people that work from home? Those kinds of things. The political frame, and we're not talking about, politics in Washington. We're talking about internal politics. And most of the time, we're talking about power and resources. Do you have one of those organizations where, people are competing for like scarce resources? Like there's some sort of a cap. Let's say you can only have 100 employees in the entire organization. So everyone is clawing at that number. Like, well, I want 50. Well, no, you can only have 48 because I need to move 2 from over here. That kind of stuff. So the politics of consolidating power and pulling up scarce resources. If you're in one of those turf war kind of organizations, and boy, any type of systems approach is going to run into some trouble. So competition for resources, and whenever you start taking power away from someone who has power, wow. The story I gave about this one person who was fairly influential was going to lose all of her power, and she was not happy. And then symbolic. The symbolic frame talking about more like the culture. This is the perception of the organization. Are we a hip, cool organization? Are we one of the companies that say, our first credo is do no harm? Those kinds of companies. And you can kind of look at that by, how the employees dress. If they come in with suit and ties, and that's like, whoa, okay, that's the forward-facing view of the company, right? So what we're talking about is the culture. What is the culture of our organization? Are they kind of laid back? Are they kind of stuffy? And again, if you understand each one of these four frames, it's going to help you dramatically on how to approach putting together some sort of a project. Okay, so continuing on page 49, talking about organizational structures. And so most organizations are built sort of like this. You could have what's called just a traditional functional organizational chart, where you have, a VP for engineering. So you have an engineering division, a manufacturing, and IT and HR, and maybe you got finance, and maybe some others. And so everyone does their own thing. And the engineering staff typically, let me just back up. So it's based on what they do, okay, what they do for a living. All the engineers work over here. All manufacturing are all over here. All HR people are over here. So, for example, these guys don't have any HR people or IT people, right? Because they're just engineering. That's all they do. Cool. All right. The problem here is people rarely cross-pollinate, so to speak. Rarely do you go borrow an IT person, or maybe the IT person wants to borrow somebody from manufacturing. These are little silos inside the organization, and there's very little cross back and forth. So, although this is the traditional view, it's not really, let me put it this way. Most organizations who started with that don't end up with that. That's how they start. Then they grow to the point where they go, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. All the HR is over here. Why don't we have some HR someplace else? That kind of stuff. So continuing, the project view. The project view is, my company is big enough so that I really have to have like an engineering section and a manufacturing and IT and staff under a particular program. So I have duplicates. I have engineers over here and over here and over here. Now, the classic example is that like a big company like Samsung. Okay, so Samsung makes cell phones. They also make refrigerators. Okay, do you think maybe the manufacturing, they run both the phones and the refrigerators off the same assembly line? No. What about their engineering and software people? Is there any would there be any value at all to go borrow an engineer from the refrigeration section to work on your phone? No. All right, so clearly these things are based on projects. Sometimes it's geographic area. The Germany office has their own HR and IT and blah, 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 So sometimes it's the project, sometimes it's geography. And so this works pretty good, but you can probably kind of sort of tell that depending on the workload, you could have HR people over here that are doing nothing, and over here the HR people are absolutely swamped. And since there's no real cross-pollination going on, it's not like, hey, can I borrow one of your HR people for a couple of days? So this is okay, but it has a tremendous amount of inefficiencies. So, and by the way, some of these projects could be temporary. We spin off an organization, staff it up, and then run it for a year, and then close it back down. For example, if this was a construction company, well, you would do that. You would spin off a company just to build this new hospital. And when the hospital is done after a couple of years, it just absorbs back into the organization. Cool? All right. So there's very little common function. There may be something up here that everyone shares, okay? Maybe. And then an awful lot of duplication. All right. So the last one is the matrix, which is kind of a combination of the two. So yes, we have program managers. And yes, we have engineering. And yes, we have manufacturing. And so I can split things up. So project manager A gets 2 engineers from the engineering folks. Project manager B gets 5 engineers. We just pull from those guys. Now, there is a problem with this approach, and you have to be a relatively mature organization to be able to handle this. And that is basically every employee has 2 bosses. They have a program boss and a functional boss. Now, you can just imagine how that sometimes could get a little contentious. About, well, wait a minute, this guy says no and that guy says yes. Who am I supposed to be answering to? So it is complex. So the problem here is the underutilization, overutilization kind of sort of goes away. If I'm not using an engineer, I can just lend him back to the functional guy. Like, look, I don't need an engineer for a week, so I'm just going to let my engineer go back to the pool, so to speak, and who could be farmed out, and then at the end of the week I go back to the pool and pull another one. So you have a pool of engineering, a pool of all these things that you can pull from. It is efficient, but you have to have an extraordinarily mature workforce and willing managers. I mean, if these guys, the program managers and these VPs, don't get along, this isn't going to work. Okay, so there's a little thing here. They talk about kind of the comparison. And this is kind of cool. It shows how they all line up. And they make some distinction between what's called a weak matrix, which means how tight do you lean towards the project or do you lean towards the function? And so, for example, here's one way of looking at it is who controls the budget? That's a really good thing. So in the functional, obviously the functional manager controls the budget. In a weak matrix, the functional manager still controls the budget. In a balance, well, they both control the budget. And then in a strong one, the project manager does. So you can kind of see how this kind of morphs slowly from left to right on how this thing works. Between functional, the 3 different versions of the matrix, and then the project guy. Okay. So this is actually a pretty good chart to look at to see, how do you go about doing things, and quite frankly, you're probably not going to be in a position to alter this organizational structure while you're doing a project. I'm just saying, right? Maybe, but the idea is that if you know these things exist in your organization, you know where you are, then this is how you plug into the system. Cool. All right, so one more time, the systems approach, again, is do Do you task an existing employee? In other words, are you in one of these scenarios where there's a pool of engineers you can pull from? Is that how you're in? Or, if not, do I have to go hire somebody? Or do I have to go contract out somebody? Maybe I can just have a consultant come in for a short period of time. So yes, you need to be keenly aware where you are on this scale of between 100% function and 100% project and all the steps in between, because that's going to make a keen distinction when it comes to I need some help. Okay. Organizational culture. They talk about these 10 things that the organizational 10 characteristics of an organization. It's worth going through. So member identity. So we're talking about basically who are these people loyal to? Are they loyal to themselves? Are they loyal to the organization? Are they willing to give up something in order to make sure this product is the greatest? Just where are they in there? If these are just people working on a dull assembly line and they're turning the wrench, occasionally wiping the drool from the corner of their mouth because they're so bored to death, they're probably not going to have a strong identity towards the organization, right? Cool. All right. The next one talks about group emphasis. Do people in the organization already work in groups? Or are they all just individuals? And again, this is kind of one of those things where you can kind of rate an organization, give them an A or a B or a C or a D or an F on how well they work in groups. Typically, it's just experience, right? If you work in groups a lot, you get better at it. People focus. So we're talking about management here. Does management often make good decisions based upon trying to keep their people happy? I mean, we're not necessarily talking about raises and perks necessarily, but we're talking about just management decisions as a whole. About everyone has to work 10-hour work weeks until we can solve this problem, that kind of stuff. Or do they how people friendly is management? Again, you could get a score on that, couldn't you? Unit integration. So if people in your organizations from one division, are they encouraged to kind of seek out and help other people in other organizations, or is that frowned upon? I mean, I worked in an organization where you'd get fussed at if you walked across the hall and said, "Say, I don't really have anything to do right now. Can I help you with one of your projects?" I mean, that was, no, can't do that. Okay. Control. So we're talking about, the rules and policies. Are you one of those organizations that has tons and tons and tons of rules, regulations that you have to deal with? Or is it kind of loose things like, we'd prefer that you come in and do this, this, and this, but it's okay if you don't. That kind of a philosophy. And again, you could get a score on that. Risk tolerance. Some organizations, think about a financial organization. You're doing, stock trades. Probably your risk tolerance is probably pretty doggone high or low. Yeah, high. In other words, it's okay for me to take risks. And younger, starting out companies, they almost have to be risk tolerant, tolerant, in order to get anything done. As the organization gets a little bigger, and perhaps a public traded organization, well, now you've got some brakes on the system on just how risky you're willing to do. I'm going to bet the company on this new product. Okay. So then you could get a score, right, on how tolerant you are on making big decisions, big risks. Reward criteria. So we're talking about, promotions and salaries and perks. One of the things that people often talk about is everything based on tenure? I've been here 4 years, so I'm the one that's going to be going to training. Or is it going to be one of those things where it's merit-based? And so, again, you can just kind of imagine how your organization that you're currently in, how does their reward criteria work? Okay, once again, we're coming up on the 15-minute mark, so we'll pick this thing up again in just a few.